upon a time, a woodcutter lived with his wife and 2 children in a small cottage at the edge of a wood. The children were known as Hansel and Gretel. Hansel loved his little sister dearly, and the 2 were together always. Every day they'd go to the forest to gather berries to help make work light inside their humble home. Now, because there was famine in the land, times were hard for the little family. Very often they had to go hungry, for there wasn't a single penny with which to buy food. One day, Hansel and Gretel returned from picking berries earlier than usual and heard their father say, "What are we going to do? We've scarcely a bit of food to give our children. They'll surely starve." Now, his wife was so cruel and selfish she didn't answer her husband just then. But later she said, "I'll get rid of these troublesome tots. Tomorrow I'll take them to pick berries in the thickest part of the wood where they've never been before. I'll leave them alone. They won't be able to find their way back." Hearing this, Gretel began to cry, but Hansel said, "Don't weep, little sister. I'll take care of you." Now, bright and early the next morning, the woman gave them each a dry crust of bread for their breakfast. Then they started through the wood. Hansel crumbled his bread in his hand, and as they crossed unfamiliar paths, he dropped the crumbs so that he and Gretel could trace their steps homeward. The woman led them farther and farther into the forest. Then, in her sweetest voice, so they'd suspect no harm, she said, "Stay here, my dear ones. I'm going farther to pick berries, but I'll be back for you, yes, at sundown." The children were very tired, so they lay down and were soon fast asleep. When they awoke, the man in the moon was smiling in all his glory. By his bright light, it would be easy to find crumbs, Hansel and Gretel thought. But when they started to go home, they found they were lost, for hundreds of little birds had eaten every single crumb. "Oh, what'll we do?" cried Gretel. "We'll find our way soon," comforted Hansel. But look as they might, they couldn't find the path that led them back to their home. They walked the whole night through. As morning dawned, they saw a tiny brown cottage so quaint it made them laugh. Tired as they were, they ran over to it. When they got very near, they saw that it was made of caramel candy with a chocolate-frosted roof. The windows were panes of frozen lemonade. The chimney was a giant peppermint stick, and a fence of gingerbread people encircled its tiny yard. Hansel and Gretel were delighted. They were so hungry they began nibbling at the cottage. "You take a piece of the door, and I'll have a bite of the window," called Hansel. So they began minching and munching on the cottage. Then, suddenly a voice called, "Who is nibbling at my house? Is it a bird or little mouse?" The children were startled, but they were so hungry they couldn't stop eating. Then, all at once, the door opened. Before them stood a bent old woman. Although she seemed to be kind, she was really a wicked witch. She built cottages just to attract children to her. With her cunning magic, she'd bake boys and girls into gingerbread and put them in a row all around her house. When Hansel and Gretel saw her, they were frightened. They started to run away, but the old witch called out kindly, "I won't harm you. Come into my cottage and stay with me. I'll give you a treat that will please you." So Hansel and Gretel went inside. After they'd eaten sugar cookies and gumdrops, the old woman showed them 2 snowy white beds into which they crept and fell asleep. Then she looked at them and chuckled again. What fine gingerbread people they will make. The next morning, before the children knew what was happening, the old witch seized Hansel and threw him in an iron cage. She made Gretel scrub and bake and work very hard from early morning until late at night. And then she said, "Gretel, build a great fire.
Today I'm going to bake Hansel into gingerbread.
Oh, how poor little Gretel cried. But she did as she was told and laid the wood inside the stove, hoping that she might think of something that would save her brother.
When the fire was blazing, the Wicked Witch said, "Open the door to see if it's hot enough to bake."
Now Gretel knew that the old witch meant to push her inside the oven to bake her into gingerbread also. She therefore pretended to be stupid. She opened the door. She leaned way over, and when the Wicked Witch lunged forward to push her inside, Gretel quickly moved aside, and the clumsy witch fell sprawling into the oven. The great door banged shut. The witch's evil spell was now broken. Gretel ran over to Hansel, shouting, "We're free! The Wicked Witch will never harm boys and girls again!" She opened Hansel's cage, and out he jumped. The two of them danced for joy about the caramel candy cottage. Suddenly, they heard laughter and happy shouts of glee. They ran to the door to see where the sounds came from. Much to their surprise, all the gingerbread people that encircled the house as a fence had come to life. They were as gay as children could be. They scampered in every direction, running like frisky rabbits to find their home. Hansel and Gretel were about to leave when they saw something sparkling in the witch's cupboard. They looked inside. Oh, they found chests of gold and silver and precious stones that the old witch had taken from kind people. They filled their pockets to the brim, and then they said, "We must return this treasure to the rightful owners." As they walked through the woods, it seemed to become enchanted. The limbs on every tree pointed to their home. Soon they saw it in the distance. They ran as fast as their little legs could go. Reaching their cottage, they hurried inside. Oh, they found their father grieving bitterly. He thought they were lost. How overjoyed he was at their homecoming. His wife felt so sorry for what she'd done that she begged their forgiveness and promised to be generous and kind from that day on. Hansel and Gretel showed their parents all the precious stones they had in their pockets. They, in turn, helped them find the rightful owners, who rewarded them so richly that they were never poor again, and so they lived happily ever after.